Keynes Gashia as a member. There's Mary Mulwa. We have Dr. Catherine Kariuki representing the academic sector. We have Simon Waruya from private practice. We have Bansi Kinuthia from the public sector. Benson Katiku from private sector as well. Anne Saruni from public sector. And of course, chair of the chapter IU and secretariat are in attendance for purposes of secretarial role. So I would ask the secretariat to project the standard draft. We, as the task force, have come up with about 21 standards. And these standards are systematic. We looked at property management from the start to the end. So the moment you get instructions to manage a property, to eventually vacating a contract if the property is being transferred to another managing agent. But the first standard will be about professional principles that needs to apply across board as professionals to guide all through. I think we will get comments from members if there are other areas they feel are missing that we need to consider and areas of improvement. Then when you'll be looking at the standard, it is in a format of 3 headings or categories, where you have an introduction part, which in brief explains the rationale behind the standard. Then part 2 are statements of standard, which essentially will be the applicable standard. And the third part will be explanations of the standard, which simply tries to explain also what those standards mean. So that will be the format that we will be presenting. So probably we could start through standard 1, which we call professional framework. These are the professional principles that should apply in management. They're essentially 13, where the first one is that you need to conduct your business honestly, fairly, and transparently. Second principle is you need to do your task with due skill, care, diligence, and objectivity. The third part is that you need to ensure that those whom you have employed to enable you carry out the tasks have the necessary skills for doing so. The fourth is that in engaging the client, the terms of engagement needs to be clear, fair, and legal. The fifth is about addressing conflict of interest, which needs to be avoided, but where they exist, they need to be declared promptly and openly. The sixth is that in your dealings, you need not to discriminate subjectively and unfairly. It needs to be, when you are assessing any dealing, it needs to be objective and based on parameters that are fair and objective. The seventh principle is that your communications needs to be timely, clear, and transparent. Eighth principle deals with marketing materials, needs to be objective, decent, and truthful. The ninth is that it's advised that where you are handling client money, they need to be in separate and appropriately designated accounts. This has emanated from the Estate Agents Act. 10th principle requires that you need to have insurance cover for client money. In case anything happens, there is protection. 11th one is that you also need to have professional indemnity insurance. Again, this is also in the Estate Agents Act as well. 12th one is that where you need to give assessments, they need to be reliable by using your best professional judgment. And the third is that where you are to have meetings, they need to be reasonable, lawful, secure, and safe in the context of the current environment. So those were the 13 principles that we came up with. Not sure whether to go on to the explanations of the standards. I believe that members have gone through it, and it's only in areas where they are not clear that you can be able to make those explanations. I would ask the moderator whether we receive comments on each standard, or should it be done at ballpark at the end? Ayub.
Maybe, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Maybe on that particular section, just the initial part, we can get 2 or 3 comments. But now on the rest of the standards, we can have it into, we can do into 2 sections, say from standard, say 1 or 2 to around 11, we get comments. Then now from 11 to the 21st standard, we get maybe the 3rd batch of comments. Then now we're able to wrap it up. So maybe for this one, we can invite quick comments or any reactions. Thereafter, we'll go to the subsequent 10 or 11 standards. Then after we finalize with the very last part of the remaining
Thank you.
10 standards. I don't know if that, yeah. Do you have any comments from the members? So there seem to be none. We can proceed, and maybe members can be commenting as we progress.
Fine. We got to the 2nd standard about securing instructions for management. It will handle 3 aspects when you are securing instructions in terms of who you are getting instructions for managed from, the scope of your work, and of course about the charges for the services. So in standard 2, there are just 2 standards under statements of standard that you need to have a written contract with the client. And then in that contract, it needs to consider scope of work, the charges, duration of the contract, termination options, limitations, and signing of the contract, which is attestation. So it's those two that we recommended under securing instructions of management. You go to standard 3 on contracting. When you now have the contract document arising from standard 2, the standards are 5, that the responsibility of each party in the contract needs to be understood. There's a recommendation of liability clause to limit the manager's liabilities within the contract. The terms of the contract should be reasonable to both parties. The 4th standard is that the termination clause and notice period should be clear, and it's recommended should range from 30 to 90 days, which is 1 month to 3 months. Then the contract needs to be clear on the duties of each party upon termination of the instructions and how long it should take for those duties to be carried out. What we had in mind here is issues like where there are funds, how should they be handed over, within what time, the handover documents, even clients in terms of meeting their obligations if there were some shortfalls. We go to standard 4. Standard 4 is now you have secured instructions, you have the contract, and you're taking over the property for management. There need to be 4. First is that there needs to be a checklist which covers the assets, documentations, and records. That helps in avoiding any misunderstanding and any missing gaps, or any gaps in the management is identified at the earliest opportunity. In case there was an existing manager, ensure that any balance of rentals and service charges are handed over. The 3rd standard is a condition survey of the property needs to be conducted and documented. The 4th standard is ensure that all relevant financial documents are handed over, possibly if they also audited accounts. So it's those 4 aspects that needs to be considered in principle. We go to standard 5. In standard 5 is about tenancy management, where we're looking at you've taken over now the property and you now start managing the tenants, which is the critical part in the management. So in standard 5, we have 7 standards. Could you scroll up for the members to see those who may not have it on standard 5? There should be 7 standards. Just scroll to standard 5. It should be on page 13. So the first standard under tenancy management is you need to understand the tenancy agreement, because that is what will govern the relationship between you and the landlord, or the manager and the landlord, and the manager and the tenant. The relevant laws about tenancy also need to be well grasped by the manager, to manage that tenancy effectively within the context of existing laws. The third standard is that tenancy agreement should be reduced to writing all the time. In case a letting agent is involved, that's under standard 4, it should be clear that there are responsibilities that relate to the landlord and the tenant's obligations, and the letting agents needs to explain that clearly to the tenants for their responsibility. This arose from cases where you find lots of misrepresentation of what the agent told the incoming tenant is not in sync with what the landlord or the managing agents want and explain. Standard 5 should be that there should be policies and regulations to aid in management of the tenancy agreement. You find in properties there are also regulations if it's a complex of apartments or gated communities. They may not form part of the tenancy agreement, but sometimes they can be referred to in the tenancy agreement, and they need to be clear to the tenant. Standard 6 is that there are processes as per tenancy agreement that needs to be implemented. An example here is if a tenant is vacating, the tenancy agreements must be clear on the process, from their inspection of status of the properties, utilities, and timelines. And when they leave, in case of net deposit refund, it should be given within what time. Those are what falls under standard 6. Then standard 7 is essentially implementing or enforcing the tenancy agreement in terms of the covenants observed by the tenant. With that, we go to standard 6. Standard 6 is quite a huge document, but we've looked at it in principle. We noted that there is a real misunderstanding about measurements. Some could be in terms of to what length do you measure, depending on various purposes, probably also the kind of real estate. So we were of the view that instead of reinventing the wheel, there's already an international property measurement standards. And we were recommending that we adopt that. They are available at that website that we provided, www.ipmsc.org. So there are simply certain terminologies which are not common here in our country that we decided to use our terminologies, and that will form part of the standard. So there may be 13 standards within this standard 6 on property measurement. So on property measurement, if you go to that website, they have different measuring methods for essentially 4 different types of buildings. Office buildings have different measurement methodologies. residential buildings different, industrial buildings as well, and retail buildings. So in standard 1, we have recommended that you adopt the measurement standard office buildings of 2014. But we recommended a variation under standard 6.35 and 6.312, which is within that standard. Standard 2 is adopting the International Property Measurement Standards for residential buildings of 2016, of course, with the variations. Standard 3 is we adopt the one of industrial buildings of 2018 with a variation. And standard 4 is we adopt the one of retail buildings of 2019, of course, with variations. Now, those variations, they are referring to 6.35 and 6.312. It should be 6.25 and 6.212. So 6.25, go up for the members. 6.25 is that where those documents refer to internal dominant face, it should be considered as a reference to finished surface. There are definitions of those terms within those standards. But because of the way we generally do measurements here, that's why we have made that variation in terms of reference of what they mean. Then 6.26, again, we mostly measure in feet. In the standard, they are referring to metric meters. So again, or they are referring to millimeters. Again, we recommend that the reference should mean feet. On 6.27, which is also a variation within the standard, we recommend that the degree of tolerance or the variance between measurements should be about 5%. So if both of you measured even a commercial property, the lettable space or the rentable space after measurements done by 2 or 3, 4 property managers, the allowable variance should not be more than a 5% difference. In standard 8, there's been different terminologies of storage buildings, whether they are floors or they are levels. We have recommended that for purposes of the standard, what we generally refer to as ground floor be referred to as level 0. So basements will then have negative connotation, and then upper floors can be sequentially labeled. So if you have a 4-story building, the highest level becomes level 4. On standard 6.29, we recommended that the calculation under IPMS 1 should be referred to as gross external area. I think at a point we have substantive discussion on property measurements in order to be able to grasp some of these references that we are making, because it's a huge document in itself. In standard 10, the resultant calculated area under IPMS 2 should be referred to as gross internal area. Standard 11, the hygiene areas as referred to under component areas in all those standards, we recommend that they should always be referred to as sanitary areas. And then standard 12 is we recommend that other areas, whenever component areas are being considered in property measurement using the IPMS, they should be referred to as ancillary areas. And the final standard, that's standard 13, we have adopted terms that we generally use here, but were not in that IPMS. That is, net internal areas and lettable space shall have meanings as given in the glossary. So essentially, those were the 13 standards we recommended under standard 6. Let's go to standard 7. Standard 7 has essentially eight standards, and that guides about rent and service charge management. So in the first standard, advises on how to set rental amount. It may infringe on rental valuation, but that will be subject to further discussions. But we also said in management, the times when you need to have reviews within property management. So there are considerations you need to have when setting the rental rate: property type, the location of the property, the market evidence, condition of the property, size of the property, tenancy type, and terms. Then standard 2 is that where it is clear in the tenancy documents on how review or rentals should be done, and that should be guided by the procedures indicated in the agreement. Standard 3 deals with where you need to issue invoices or demands, then they should be done promptly, and they should always be clear to the tenant. Standard 4, which is a critical part of management in terms of rent collection, that one should have an efficient system of monitoring rent collection so that you don't have cases where huge arrears arises or dispute arises in terms of payment. Standard 5 is that there should be clarity on service charge amounts and how they are apportioned. Again, this avoids disputes and also ensures in terms of accounting. Standard 6 recommends having a service charge budget so that in areas which are covered under service charge, there is effective management, there is no shortfall, and there is no huge surpluses, because essentially it should facilitate providing those common area services. Then standard 7 also recommends keeping track of service charge, just like the one of rent collection. Then standard 8 is simply recommending accounting for the service charge and giving it to tenants to inform the next period as is a standard practice. So there were those 8 standards within standard 7. We go to standard 8 on repairs and maintenance management. It's also a critical part of management. And under that standard, there are about 13 statements. The first statement, which is standard 8.21, recommends having corrective maintenance works carried out in compliance with the client's objective. 8.22 recommends supervision of the works so that whatever was agreed is complied with, because these works are carried usually either on behalf of the landlord or on behalf of the tenant. 8.23 is recommending having an effective system and procedures for handling repairs and replacements from the times of reporting, how are they reported, timelines for turnover, getting quotations, or having also the service providers who can carry them out. Standard 4, 8.24, looks at management of maintenance materials in terms of stock and inventory. Standard 5 considers convenience, the interruptions to existing tenants in case works are being carried out. Standard 6 looks at planned maintenance, which is mainly on facilities and relates to manufacturers' recommendations and the cycles required to keep those facilities in good operating condition. Standard 7 also just requires monitoring that planned maintenance are carried out with agreed schedules and scope of work. Standard 8, 8.28 looks at having operating and maintenance manuals and any necessary licenses and permits required. Let's say, for instance, even fire extinguishing systems in place, they may have manuals, there are various facilities and machineries. Those needs to be available as well. 8.29 looks at compliance with relevant laws and regulations and codes required. Number 10 looks at the scope or the threshold of various repairs in terms of what repairs can be carried out through the approval of the manager. Which ones do you require approval of the landlord. So those thresholds needs to be clear, and reporting to notifying tenants also when works are to be carried out. 8.211 is recommending prompt repairs being carried out depending on status of the defects. 8.212 looks at the level of responsibilities out of the repairs based on law and regulations and the contract. And even the lease may provide within which certain works needs to be executed. 8.213 looks at competency, that most work should avoid repeat jobs. They should be done right and well in the first instance. So those are the 13 statements of standard within standard 8. We go to standard 9. Standard 9 deals with managing outgoings, land rates, insurance covers, any other regular outgoings. That has 5 statements. The first statement advises having a checklist to ensure compliance. Second statement, that's 9.22, is about record keeping. So that in cases of disputes, you have document to show that there was compliance. Just like for land rent payment, you have instances where when systems change, you are given huge arrears and you have to prove that they had been paid. Statement 3 is simply managing those outgoings to ensure that they are reasonable, particularly those which may relate to efficient management. Statement 4 is about budget for the being done for outgoings, so that the landlord knows what is expected and helps in monitoring. Standard 5 or statement 5 deals with getting competitive quotations for outgoings which require such, let's say like for insurance covers. Let's go to standard 10 on information management. Managing information is important in property management as well, both to ensure in resolving any disputes and also compliance with the regulations. And the first statement under information management is a recommendation that there should be a system that allows for proactive and efficient management of any portfolio that is there for management. Second statement recommends an information management system that records times and expenses incurred for each client. Statement 3 is that it should consider the schedule of documentation of being property being management. You'll sometimes experience this when there are various property management software coming to the market. You may see what are the schedules, the documents that are required, what aspects have been considered. Now, this statement 3 handles that. Statement 4 is about how records are kept on property documents. It may be both in hard copy and soft copy. Statement 5 deals with up-to-date, ensuring documents and records are not outdated. Statement 6, it ensuring information gathered from clients is kept confidential and is only accessible to authorized persons within the firm. That may bring a 7th statement, which is not there, but regarding compliance with Data Protection Act and regulations. So statement 7 may indicate that ensure compliance with the Data Protection Act and regulations. The Data Protection Act of 2019 and the regulation that property management are not exempted from registering as what are called data controllers. Data controllers are those who determine the purpose for which they want the data and the manner on which they want the data. And tenants' information can be sensitive as we gather a lot of information in property management. So it's probably for that reason why the Act has made it mandatory, irrespective of the threshold of property management firms, they have to register as data controllers. That may also be an area that will require substantive discussion and presentation. Let's now move to standard 11. Standard 11 deals with safety and security management, and it has 8 statements. The first statement encourages confidentiality in terms of both safety and security management. Statement 2, 11.22, it's about compliance with law. Statement 3 is also about security of data and the information. You find standard 11 is more or less on the back of standard 10. So there are things which runs across in terms of security, maybe both physical security and security of information and documents. Statement 4 is specific in terms of legal requirements for health and safety, so that they are complied with. Statement 5 is about how visitors are handled in the premises in the context of both safety and security. COVID, I think, showed us the need for safety. And I believe security had already been there, while investment in various means of security were important. Statement 6 is more or less recommending that there should be a protocol to ensure manager, people who are visiting the premises are safe and secure. Statement 7 has provided certain things which need to be possibly within the premises to ensure safety and security. For instance, recommend that if possible, go to the communities, there can be access control. There probably should be also CCTV camera installations, firefighting equipment to ensure safety and security. The last statement within that standard recommends assessment. This could even be periodic to ensure that your protocol at any given time ensures safety and security of users of the premises. So those were the 8 statements within Standard 11. As the moderator had said, we could probably now seek comments and questions up to that Standard 11 before we proceed to the remaining standards. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bwana Chair, for very elaborate highlight of the standards from the 1st to the 11th. Their comments. That we're able to unmute you for you to give your comments. Alternatively, you can comment in the chat box. Do you have any comments or questions or suggestions or proposals? Anybody with a comment or a question?
I think, Mr. Chair, this is Balwali Mwangi.
Yes.
And personally, I did not have the standards. And I think it is good. And thank you for Mr. Kuor for taking us through. Maybe we could have shared the standards because I believe maybe we have 1 or 2 items that we feel might maybe to be tweaked a bit, or even in the proposals that we have. So I would request the Secretariat to share this with us so that we can go through it keenly. So that's it, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. Just for avoidance of doubt, the document was shared about a week ago. You are meant to basically click on a link and access the document. So, but maybe we can reshare the same so that you're able to maybe take time and just give additional comments.
Chairman, I may also recommend, in case it's not on the website, probably it can also be put there. Somebody can just go and download.
Sure. Thank you. Bona Frank, you can help us do that.
And there's also, even as much as more questions come, the way Lee has introduced himself also reminds me of something we will also discuss and recommend in terms of titles. He's referred himself as valuer. Of course, I'm also a valuer, but in this context, we in property management, so we'll also come up with recommended titles, whether it's PM, whether it's CPM, whether it's CP, whatever it would be. Thank you.
Thank you for the clarification. Yes, the Secretariat has shared.
The link is in the chat section. They can still download from there. It's on the website.
Thank you. There we go. That's the link. We can download and have a look at it. I'm also sharing on the WhatsApp groups that we have, the 4 of them, so that for those who don't have time to download, you can basically open on your phone and be able to peruse. There's a question in the chat box from Bona Benson Mukundi, who says, what happens when a tenant agreement is not signed? Maybe that's a question to the task force team led by the chair.
Do we respond for each question, or we wait for all questions and respond together?
Now that we don't have any other, we can be responding to that maybe as you wait for any other that could be coming.
Now, this Kenson Mukundi's question reminds me that requirement also being conversant with the laws that govern tenancies and property. Well, we recommend that you need to strive to ensure that they are signed, but the event that they are not signed, then there are certain covenants or terms and conditions which are generally implied in Land Act under the leases. If you read that, you will find there are certain expectations of lessees and lessors in instances where there is no contract. But as professional managers, strive to ensure that you have signed documents. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is there any other question or comment? From Rachel, very detailed and on point. Thank you, Rachel Jaroge. Herin, you want to say something? Herin Juma. Okay, I think Mr. Chair, we can proceed as maybe the other members can be sharing their comments on the chat group. Maybe we can proceed the last lot of the standards. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I would also give additional on for Kenson. I think he would look at Part 6 of the Land Act, will provide with general provisions on leases. But then let's now proceed to Standard 12. Standard 12 deals with accounting and financial management. And under it, we have recommended 8 statements of standards. The first statement seeks for having proper and accurate financial records, which are transparent and accessible by clients and any authorized persons. Statement 2 recommends providing reports, financial reports, to clients. Here is landlord needs to, even tenants need to have periodic statements. Statement 3 is recommending having a budget, which of course is a good practice for managing the finances and status of the property. Statement 4 deals with billing, whether you have tenants who need rental invoices. I think for commercial, it's straightforward, that's required for that. But for residential, there are some which simply says it's known by this time you need to have made the payment, but maybe those who need invoicing, some corporates. If you have utilities that are being taken care of under bulk meterage, billings and what are handled under that statement 4. Statement 5 deals with managing cash flow in terms of credit control and debt recovery measures. Statement 6 deals with reviews, mainly of the rentals, but even the service charge may require review. The expenses which may also be reviewed, where security companies are reviewed based on minimum wage increments, there are taxes that can come in, so those may also fall under that. Statement 7 deals with apportionment of service charge and possibility of creating a sinking fund on behalf of the client. Apportionment of service charge is also sometimes a bone of contention, particularly commercial properties, and relates to measurement. So when we'll have a forum for substantive discussion on property measurements, this may also be useful. And statement 8 deals with expense related to compliance issues. Like now that you said earlier that all property managers needs to register under Data Protection Act as data controllers. I think you're required to pay 4,000 Kenya shillings, depending on the threshold. I think there are 3 categories. So those are the 8 statements within that. Then we go to the 13th standard, which is about dispute and conflict resolution. This has 4 statements and is simply urging that resolving the conflicts needs to be professional, objective, and possibly generate consensus for places where they're regular, you know what may regularly cause conflict. Statement 2 recommends that property managers should not bury their head in the sand. They should acknowledge where there are disputes as a reason and see how to avoid escalation. The third statement is about empowerment on techniques and ways of resolving those disputes. Some arise due to experience, but there can also be under CPD trainings on how to resolve the conflicts. The fourth statement is where a specialist assistant may be required. Like in most tenancy agreements, you have references on how disputes can be resolved, how they can be escalated. And there you may need mediators, then you may need arbitrators, expert witnesses. So it's those four statements under dispute and conflict resolution. We go to standard 14 on human capital management, which for some would refer to as human resource management. It's an important part of management, as we had also shown under professional framework that you need to have people who are competent, and then also under information management, there's the data that you keep, so this standard also interrelate. So under standard 14, we have 11 statements. The first statement requires that you need to assess the human resource requirement for the property management so that you are effectively resourced to be able to deliver on your mandate. The second statement recommends having a clear recruitment policy to guide how you recruit, so that's not left at the whims of emergencies or depending on who is in charge at a given time. Third statement is about the letter of appointment, which needs to be clear with job descriptions and probably compliant as well with employment laws. Statement 14.2.4 is about appraisal and performance standards expected among the human resource. The fifth statement is about training to ensure that roles and the service mandate is clear to the staff. The sixth statement is about succession planning, that you need to consider that to ensure sustained delivery of the mandate. Seventh statement is about compensation for the staff, which also needs to be clear. The eighth statement is about supervision and clear line of command of responsibilities, reporting lines also needs to be ensured. 9 is about safety. Of course, there are regulations required. There are regulations which also govern the safety, but there are some which also depend on how to operate and the insurance requirement as well. The 10th statement is about compliance with relevant laws dealing with human resource and employees. The 11th and last statement within that standard is about record management of staff and employees. We go to the 15th standard. This gives a guide on portfolio management, and it has 4 statements. The first is that the professional property manager should have a clear portfolio strategy, which has smart objectives and with indicators, because remember that portfolio management is about optimizing return to the investor. The second statement is urging the manager to ensure that the mix of portfolio maximizes return for the investor. The third statement calls for analysis of the portfolio to ensure that the returns and risks meet the targets and industry benchmarks, which simply means that there should be regular reviews. That are you giving the best returns possible for the client? The last statement in that standard adds that based on statement 3, there needs to be review and adjustment to optimize the returns. Let's go to standard 16. On facilities and service providers management. We deliberated on this matter, and I think it will still be subject to reviews with time, whether at a point in time we may need to have a separate standard to deal with facilities management. For now, the task force was appointed to look at both property and facility management, but facility management also is a huge area on its own, but we thought let's include it within this context for now, but going forward, we may need to have a standard on its own. So under facilities, there are 12 statements of standard. The first statement recommends that the manager needs to have a clear management strategy. You can scroll up to standard 16 for the members who are not what to see. So the first statement is about management strategy, also for efficient facilities management. The second statement is about asset register and how it needs to be established. Third statement is about maintenance schedule and programs that needs to be in place. The fourth statement is encouraging adoption of technology so that they can be intelligent and efficient management of the properties. Statement 5 is about data management, because all these generate various data as well. And this also goes back to information management standard. The 6th statement is about budget. And this we have been deliberating where certain requirements cut across standards. Do we continue having them, or do we leave them under one standard? For instance, budget, you've seen, is running across a number of standards, but it may also be an accounting and financial issue. So we'll have these reviews before we come up with the final inaugural standard for adoption. The 7th one is about policies and guidelines for safety and health. The 8th statement is about management of service providers. Do you have a pool of service providers? How did you get them? How do you procure the services? So that's also critical in facilities management. The 9th one is about safety of the occupant and how you handle emergencies and ensure business continuity in case of emergencies. I saw something on the online sometimes back about fire that arose in a building in Uganda. And because the property management firm had put in good measures, there was very minimal disruption of that building arising from the fire. So such could fall under statement 9. Statement 10 is about the environment for operations needs to ensure safety by being clean and avoid any accidents. The 11th statement is about systems that ensure performance of the facilities is reviewed over time. For instance, if you're a backup generator, can you be able to say what is the fuel consumption? So with time, how do you know it's become inefficient and needs to be replaced? So such kind, you have a lift in a property. When the downtime has become too much, it is a time to replace it. And the last statement there is simply calling for general statutory compliance to ensure you meet the requirements every time. And that takes us to standard 17, which is about statutory compliance. It will also call for more flesh in it, because as you're discussing, there are new laws coming up. They are also all one, and they're calling for various statutory compliance, like the data protection I've just talked about. And the others keep coming, which requires various aspects of compliance. So all those would fall under statutory compliance here. The first statement there is providing that first, for somebody to practice as a property manager, they need to be registered. And this may also call a review of the Act under the second statement to be probably more clear, given now you are separating estate agency more clearly with property management. Because if you look at the Estate Agents Act, more are usually about estate agency. The third is requiring you compliance with all laws relating to property. Fourth is about compliance with the constitutional requirement of Chapter 6. At a point, we may decide whether should this go under professional framework or should it remain here, even as we add more areas that require statutory compliance. Payment of outgoings will be part of statutory compliance, land rates, the insurance, those will be built in there as well. We go to standard 18. Which is about client representation. There are instances where task arises and you're not managing the properties per se, but there are certain tasks you are assigned by tenants or landlords to carry out. That's what we thought could be handled under client client representation. And it has 6 standards or 6 statements. One is having a clear management strategy. The second statement is about having clear terms of engagement. The third statement is ensuring the client's best interests are taken care of, which could fall into some of the principles under professional framework. Statement 4 is about managing the data in accordance to law. This may be statutory compliance and other areas as well. Statement 5 is about delivering the service in a way that is a value for money. Or the client pays you, they get the value. And statement 6 is about policies and procedures to ensure compliance with existing and regular laws. So those were the 6 statements under that. We go to standard 19. Standard 19 deals with the charges for the services. As you know, in the Estate Agents Act, there are recommended charges, but there are also areas that have never been documented. So that's what this standard was to address. But we may further review this standard given the Competition Act number 12 of 2010, where some may have noted that there is an issue with setting up minimum charges for services. It is considered illegal under Section 21 of that Act. And I know LSK went to court to have it declared unconstitutional. But the ruling, I think in July, was against LSK. The ruling by Judge Ongudi. So that will also call for us to review some of what may be provided here. And for that reason, on this standard, I will go to explanations of standard as well, in addition to the statement, because the meat is in the explanations here, in the context of what I've just talked of, Competition Act. But if we start with the first statement, recommends that the managers should clearly document the services they are to render. So we'll subsequently split this first statement into two, so that the first part provides that you need to clearly document the services that you are to render. The second part will be the charges that you will levy for such services. Then the third statement will be about invoicing being separated to be clear, both whether it's for reimbursable costs or it's for those services and within those periods. The third statement had provided that we levy fees and charges in accordance to Estate Agents Act, and where not provided in the Act, we use the guide that we will shortly discuss. But that third statement may be superfluous now in the context of Competition Act. So let's go to the explanations here. For the explanations in the Act, there is about property management fee, where it provides that for residential, it should be 10% of the gross rents or less according to the circumstances, but not less than 5%. In my reading of the Competition Act and the judgment by Judge Ongudi, the aspect which may be illegal there is the part which says, but not less than 5%, because that then sets a minimum. But we'll continuously deliberate this going forward. Commercial, again, is only the part of not less than 2.5%. Letting fees, again, it's the part that is recommending not less than 3.7%. My thinking was that it should subject to further deliberations within the task force, was that we may just provide those percentage and also by arrangement as an addition. For instance, let's say on letting fee for residential lease up to 1 year, 7.5% of annual gross rent or by arrangement, because that gives room for going down or going up without setting a minimum. Proceed to the next one. I think the principle is already now clear that the only aspect is setting the minimum. So there may be no need continue going through, but just scroll down to relating fees, the same principle, which is borrowed from the Estate Agents Act. On facility management, there is no scale yet. So here we were to work with industry standard. And I think we hadn't gotten the feedback of the research of various people offering the service, what they had been charging, but it's also usually some percentage, some charge that figure. So in the next review, and based also on members' contributions, we'll be able to improve on that. Go to service charge management fee. That is 9.35. On that, based on the practice standard, we'd set up a range. But we also again look at those in the context of that Competition Act. Client representation, that one left for, it's like facilities management, we were to get if there is a methodology that can be used. That's on 9.36. Though for seeking and negotiating tenancy, we borrowed from Estate Agents Act. And with that, we go to standard 20, which is about ending instructions of management. So management may end in three ways. Three main ways may be: you may decide to terminate the agreement as the manager. The client may terminate, or the contract may also expire. So we go to the statements of that standard 20. The first statement simply indicates that when termination is happening, the date of termination should be clear, and the details of any monies owed should also be clear. The second statement provides that you need to submit an itemized invoice within a reasonable timeline, so that possibly by the time the instructions is ending, you have cleared the issue of payments outstanding. It's a good practice, as recommended by statement 3, that receipts should be issued for the amounts paid. Statement 4 seeks for accounting for any monies held on behalf of client at that time. Statement 5 recommends, if it's possible, then there should be independent certification of the final accounts. That may not be possible usually before instructions end, but there should be a reasonable timeline thereafter by when it should be submitted so that it close well. We are recommending under the sixth statement, that you should possibly even account for interest received for money, client's money deposited in a separate designated account. Ideally, they should belong to the client. So those were the six statements and ending of instructions. The final standard here, which the instructions have ended, and you also need to hand over the property in the same way you took over the property. So that gives rise to standard 21. And there are three statements within that. The first statement is in liaison with the client. You need to get the information that needs to be passed on to the incoming manager or the client. So generally, as a professional property manager, you may also know what you need to hand over, but that liaison is important for purposes of smooth transition and to maintain the relationship. Then second statement seeks for accounting for any funds received from the moment of you received instructions terminating the management and the time of handover. And the third recommends that you need to have a checklist, which will ensure that the comprehensive and conclusive handover takes place. So those are the standards that we recommend to you as the task force. Thank you. And we can get comments again through the moderator.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Board Chair, for a very detailed presentation of the standard, the draft standard. We appreciate the effort of the team led by the chairman. And, we want to look at the comments. And as we look at the ones that are in the chat section, you can maybe make additional comments or raise your hand. We unmute you even as you make one or two comments or questions, or anything that you have maybe regarding the draft standards. We have a comment or a question from John, Mr. John Kalungi, who says that on disclosure of sustainability, performance, and climate risk-related information, how are you integrating it in the standards? Could it be something that can be incorporated in the information management standards? That's a question. The discussion about sustainability, performance, and risk and climate risk-related information. Yeah, I think the discussion about sustainability is gaining momentum. Maybe we can see how to do that. Maybe the chair can comment, or any of the task force members. Comment from Dr. Musaleku. Great job. Document is timely and very helpful. Comment on Mr. Jacob Buru. Very crucial document indeed. Thank you all for the efforts. Then Mr. Jacob Buru asks, what was LSK's argument in the competition case issue? Maybe we can share the the summary of the judgment in the argument. Then Mr. Chaboro, that's Martin. Thanks, Collins, for the presentation. For clarity, you have recommended for measurements to be done in feet. Is this the international best practice? That's a question. Lee Mwangi, thanks for the milestone. Same comment from somebody called Hugo, just as one name. Same to Sharon. Charlene, Steve, and Ronald. Thank you. So maybe we can have comments on those questions.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Let me start with John Kalungi on disclosure of sustainability performance. I think it's something we'll consider, and as the task force will decide whether it can something which warrants being on its own, given the currency of those issues, or whether it can be infused with other standards, particularly information management you're talking about. On Jacob Mburu's about LSK's argument, the Act, Competition Act, provides under Section 29 that groupings, which include professional associations that want to set up their some prices, considers a price control, needs to seek leave of the competition authority. So you write to them and they exempt you from application of the Act. And there are two rationales they use. One is that you have to prove that setting up that ensures that the service that you are delivering to the consumers is quality, very high quality, which will be jeopardized if such rates were not set up. Second is that it has to prove that it will not create unfairness in a competition. So those are the two rationales used. And I believe that LSK, there's also another professional association which had applied and they were denied. So LSK decided to petition the Constitutional Human Rights Division of the High Court to render that clause 29 unconstitutional. And that's what the ruling was against them. The one of Martin Chebaror on usage of it. We're trying to balance creating a standard for Kenya and essentially we're creating a standard for Kenya. And the rationale was that if we were not to create a standard for Kenya, then there was no need having the task force, because there are already some international standards of various aspects. But practitioners in Kenya, we need one document where you can make reference to most aspects of management. Most of us use FIT, which essentially springs from our colonizers, the British. the Americans and what use metric of meters and millimeters. But that is an issue for us to debate as practitioners in Kenya, whether we would want to go the metric way or imperial way. But whichever way, we felt that since it's a standard we are creating, we need to have one set of unit that is recommended for use within the country. I think those were the queries, yeah. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you for those comments and responses. We have two hands from Ms. Njeri Njoroge and Mr. Jesse Kihoro. We can have the two addressers, starting with Ms. Njeri Njoroge, then followed by Jesse.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ayub, and thank you, Chair, on behalf of the task force. Indeed, you have done a great job. It's elaborate, but simply put. Mine was just some few comments I have in respect to number one, on the definitions. Allow me to just, it's like an umbrella of a lot of issues within the standard. On the definition of the tenancy agreement, I was just thinking through about the other statutes that do mention the lease, and felt that probably it would be important to just add the lease and probably input that it has the same meaning as a tenancy agreement, but applies to maybe the commercial properties. That is just on the definition. These are the one, in respect to the standard, the entire set of the standards. From what I have seen, say IFRS and other standards, there's usually sort of a separation, given that we are professionals and we need to be distinguished in respect to the application of the standards in our operations. Why am I saying this? What we are calling maybe the statements, in other standards we find that they are putting as guidance notes, but I just wanted to understand whether there is any part that we are saying should be mandatory in application, or whether these are just but recommendations. In that, if you think about the property management field, it's very infiltrated, and if we are to stand out, then I think there are some parts that we may need to indicate whether they are mandatory or they're just recommendations, and probably now give the guidance notes in terms of the application. So that was just an observation, because are these standards mandatory or are they optional? Should there be any dispute, are we to refer to the standard, where someone can argue then that these were just the recommendation and it's not a must to really apply? So I think we just need to distinguish whether there are some that are mandatory standards and some are just recommendations. Number three, I do agree with the chairman that the FM, facilities management field, is quite wide and may require a separate standard, because I was just looking at Mr. Jones' recommendation on the issues of sustainability. I know currently most of the corporates going through this, the facilities management way, there's that incorporation about the issues of sustainability. And I suppose this may not, yes, there may be a statement or maybe a section on the sustainability or climate related issues, but I think it goes beyond that and it's quite very wide. In respect to the charges, in the industry, I know people who have, okay, like ourselves where I work, we may be charging the facilities management, but we may have lacked a guidance in terms of, because very few firms, or there had not been any reference document in respect to what to charge. When you look at the some of the international companies offering facilities management, some would charge based on the lettable space, a rate based on the lettable space. And I know going through that direction, sometimes the client would feel that it's a bit very high. So I think it's an area that I'll be interested in, or even await the guidance. Another comment on the client representation fees. If you look at the, the percentages based on probably how you will argue, so sometimes it will be good to, or it's a recommendation to charge based on what you are actually saving the client, because in that case, and I'm just arguing for the sake of, as a professionals, when you're charging based on what you're saving the client, you may charge the interest, or you as a negotiator, the interest would be to save the client, more, or in terms of the return, they should be able to feel the benefit. And in that light, then based on a percentage out of what you'd save, the interest, you not be biased in terms of what you're charging, because you would want to save the client more, and in that you'll be earning more. So anyway, it's an ongoing discussion, but I would like to commend the team for the good job well done. Plus the final one would be, maybe we need to give members 1 or 2 days, additional 1 or 2 days to read it through. Those who do not have time to maybe just overly give, their views before this is finalized. Otherwise, thank you, team, for a job well done. Over
Thank
to
you.
Ayub.
Thank you very much, Helen, for your comments. Very nice comments. Bona Jesse?
Thank you, Ayub. And Emeritus ISK Chair Kowal and the Chair of the Task Force for the work well done. And we need to reserve a special thanks for Kowal and his team, and especially him being a senior member of the institution and of the profession, having found time to work on a document while many other colleagues want to thank you for offering that guidance. And we are always, I would say we're very lucky to have such a former chair who is able to take time and involve himself with a little happening in the industry. That said, I would like to weigh in on the issue of the scale of fees. Well, I note that there was a case that LSK and the Institution of Certified Public Accountants, and also I believe the umbrella body for professionals in Kenya. The name is disappearing.
APSEA.
APSEA went to court and they lost the case. But a keener look at that judgment will probably betray an oversight by LSK. And sometimes I have a feeling that the intrigues at the LSK Council play out in any case that they pursue at the court. And we all recall what was happening before, when Harvey was the president of the LSK. That said, of course, court judgments are presumed to have been offered or issued above board. And again, when you look at the substance of the application, it was on the constitutionality of that section, that section requiring professional bodies to seek leave so that they can have rules and regulations. I don't know. The Competition Authority is an act of parliament, just like the Valuers Act, the Estate Agents Act, and the Advocates Act. Other those respective acts for the various professionals, they provide for charging of fees. So I would not say that the charging of fees is set by the professionals themselves. I would like to probably distinguish that ruling from what we do, because we follow an act of parliament, and unless that is probably repealed, one would argue that we are right to follow the scale of fees. And basically that has been the argument even the advocates have been using to continue operating under the remuneration order. So I would suggest that we exclude it from the standards because of course, I don't think we have the capacity or the will probably to fight with CA in case they start raising issues. So I would recommend that we exclude the scale of fees for that reason. The other issue, of course, is that we may not have a perfect standard, but for a start, we'll have a good document that we can use to present to our clients. We all do presentation each and every day, and now when we have standards, we have a document that one can summarize and probably present to the client, and have the standards that are as the appendices, and this will be this will give us a head start in every negotiations that we are gonna get into. So I would like the team, I would suggest that the team looks not into perfecting the document. Having a document that can start guiding the industry, then we can perfect it along the way. Just as we did with the pollution standards, we can continue perfecting it as we go on. Thanks a lot, Ayub, and the rest of the members can have a good day.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much, Jesse and Helen, for the comments. Very important and very elaborate comments. Do you have any other person with any comments before the chair comments, plus any other task force member who's around? Maybe before the chair comments about the questions and the comments, I can invite the task force members who are here just to say hi or say a word.
Can see Bansi is there.
Yes, we have Bansi. The admin, you can unmute. You can unmute Bansi. Unmute also Dr. Catherine Karaoke.
Yes, good morning, members.
Good morning.
Yeah, my name is Bansi Kinuthia, a member of the task force. I'd like to thank the chair for taking us through the presentation. And we also thank you, members, for your contributions and your comments. And we hope that we will continue to get more so that we can enrich this document so that it can become a good one that will guide us in our day-to-day activities. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Bansi. Dr. Catherine Cleopas Oboroso is here. Just comment.
Okay, thank you, Ayub and the chairman, Collins, and the rest of you who've commented and those who will comment later. And thank you for your recommendations. I think we'll look at them and enrich the document as we go go on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daktari. Any other task force member who is able to speak?
Is Clay first born?
Yes, he's here. I don't know whether he's in a position to speak. Okay. Good. I think Chair, you can make comments, and then after I can finalize.
Let me also register. There was apology from Kins Gashia and Mary Mudo. They couldn't be able to make it due to other engagements. I think Simon Warui was also here. Maybe he's left. That's okay. Let me start with Lee Mangi has recommended if we can incorporate the relevant legislations in the standard. I would not recommend that because if we incorporate it by insertion, then you make the document inflexible. But if you refer to it and any other amendments, you leave room for applicability for a long time. So I won't recommend adding those legislations within the standard. Then Helen's contribution on tenancy agreement, I concur that we can have reference to lease as well. There may also be other terminologies which have references across board. We may do that as well. So we look at those interpretations and have that. On the comment about whether the standard is mandatory or not, whether it could be a guide or not, that goes to the definition of standard. Their guidance, their guidelines, they are standard. My understanding of a meaning of standard is that that creates a mandatory item. It was in that context why there was no need to explain that it is mandatory, because that's why it is standard. And it's also why we're referring to them there as standards. But we'll continuously review that, what to make it clear that whatever document we are producing and making should be mandatory. On facilities management, we will put there briefly because we cannot create another standard right now. But again, those emerging areas, we should not leave them out there completely. So it's for that reason why we may just have brief mention and standards about them now, but we'll need to come up with a separate standard for facilities going forward. On charges, there are two opposing comments here. Helen, Jerry, just simply recommending what needs to be charges for facility management and client representation. She has given very useful contribution on how to put something. And Jesse is for doing away with that standard completely in the context of this ruling. My recommendation, subject to further deliberations within the task force, again, would be that we need to have that standard within this document. The only thing is that we need to come up with the guides in a way that it circumvents the provisions of Competition Act. And if you listen during my presentation, I was already making recommendations on ways on how I think we could go about it. But I think we'll also subject it to lawyers to advise. And the way I was recommending is we avoid mentioning them because that seems to the bone of contention. UPSEA that Jesse was referring to about, actually I chair the Public Affairs Committee of UPSEA as well. And this matter had come to us by some professional association addressed it. But that's why we joined LSK, because already LSK had taken the matter to court. And on deliberation, it was said the best route out was that matter being in court to be rendered unconstitutional, simply because Competition Authority were not balding to any discussion to understand. They were strict that this law says there should be no practice that interferes with fair competition. So the only option available was that. So that my recommendation would retain it, but use the wording in the context that leaves rooms for arrangement. Yeah, I think those were the comments. In terms of also, I think it's Helen who said we give members 2 or more days. For information of the members here, the program is that we plan to launch the final document next year, 24th of March. So this engagement today was what we are to consider as the first stakeholder engagement, from which once we get the comments, we'll review the document again and subject it to another stakeholder engagement on 25th of November. Then we get comments again and review it, and then hope to have a final, what is final in quote draft for chapter deliberation by 27th of January next year, and deliberation by the council before it's launched. So there's still enough time to put flesh into this document. Thank you. Over to you, Chairman.
Thank you very much.
I've seen Nefas Bor was saying you unmute him. We could still give him that chance.
Yes. Thank you. The host, the admin, can you unmute Mr. Bor? Buana Frank, are you able to do that?
Yeah, Cleophas, you can proceed.
Mr. Bor, are you able to hear us?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Yeah, sorry, I was having issues with my audio. I was saying my comment was for the window when the members of the task force were speaking, but just to appreciate everyone for for the good job. I appreciate the chair for a very good presentation and the members for the feedback. I'm going to, I think, be receiving more feedback in writing, and there's still time to include any additional remarks that may come. Looking forward to more engagement from everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Bor. Mine is just to appreciate all of us, and I want to request the ones who have given their comments, if you're able to have them in writing and send them by email to really help, at least for us to consider your thoughts in a clearer way. And also, if you'll have maybe any additional comments to make on the draft, you can still do it in writing. The draft has been circulated via the WhatsApp and via the official mails. So kindly, let's take time and basically look at this and give our comments to enable us as the task force to finalize, consolidate the comments and finalize so to be able to move to the next stage. So I think we can.
Chairman, if I may comment.
Yes, please.
Probably members can be given maybe another 1 week.
Yes.
So we say by 26th, which is Monday next week.
Yeah.
The other comments buttons we collate in order to improve on the document.
Sure.
Something which is not in the document, but remember I said that there are two things we may also need to make a recommendation, is in terms of the titles of the property manager. And something also thinking is about how we'll be referring to the standard for this, because we have the blue book for valuation standards. I wanted to recommend we refer to this as a green book in the context of sustainability and the climate issue, but subject to also any other comments that we'll be able to get. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the guidance. Yes, now by 26th, we should be able to give our written submissions and comments, including the proposal that we've put across, any additional comments that you have or improvements. I think that's said and done. I don't think there's any other comment. There's not been any other question that have not been addressed. Wish you all the best, and those comments that you will be sending will really encourage us so that at least we're able to finalize. The next engagement will be communicated, but we'll also be engaging other stakeholders that are not members of ISK, so that we're able to get views across in order to have a document that is acceptable by all. Thank you very much. I can request one of us to close with the word of prayer, unless there's any other question. Good. Ms. Sharon Agunda. You can close the word of prayer. If you're in a position. If she's not, any volunteer? Anyone to volunteer? Yes, Bona Jacob, please. The host, you can unmute Bona Jacob. Jacob Mburu. Bona Frank.
Jacob can unmute.
Jacob, I think you can now proceed.
You can hear me?
Yes.
Sarah, let's pray. Thank you so much. God, we thank you for enabling us to have this meeting. But we thank you more even for the team that has done this tremendous job. Thank you for enabling them to gather all the info that they needed to do this document. And thank you for the process that the document will go through as we seek to establish a standard for this profession. We don't take it for granted, Lord, that we have an opportunity to create this standard. And thank you, Lord, for all the efforts that have been made so far and that will be made in days to come. We ask, Lord, that it will go to serve not just the industry, but even the investors who are putting their resources into this. They will get better returns. We thank you, Lord, for what's remaining to be done as we engage, as we deliberate, as we add meat and flesh to this document. And we ask, oh God, for your insight and inspiration and guidance to the very end. All this we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Amen. Thank you. Thank you for the powerful prayer. Thanks to the chair for the presentation and the entire task force, and to all of us, even just for your time and for your feedback. I wish you the best. I hope that we'll keep commenting and giving our feedback. I can see Byron, you've unmuted. Do you want to say something or to greet us?
No, sorry, but just following. Everything is great. Yeah.
But you can greet us. You can greet us.
Yeah, sure. It's been a while, man. I hope everyone is doing well.
Thanks, Byron. Check your hand up. While you're checking, or it's you're just saying hi. You're waving. No. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Sorry, Cheki, you're saying something. Good. Thanks, everybody, for your time. I wish you all the best and pray that you'll have a blessed day ahead, even as you share your comments. Thank you. You may live at your own pleasure, if not pressure. God bless you.